Right, I'm going to crack off by just explaining that I find speech kind of difficult, which I know is kind of ironic considering I spend half my time doing public speaking, and that feedback loop is amazing.
There's an echo there. Also, you mean crack on.
Whoop. There we go. Is this working better? There we go. No, so if you come up to me later and I'm not verbal with you and I use my phone to communicate, it's just because I'm having a bit of speech trouble, or I think you're boring. 50-50. If you see me chatting to someone else later, it's probably because I thought you were boring. To just introduce myself, I'm Jamie. My day job is with the BBC, where I am a senior research engineer, which basically means I break things and don't have to fix them. And this is Mike.
Or Wookie, as everyone calls me. I'm a weird kind of lawyer, and I work for an investment bank.
It's okay, we can all silently hate him. He's a product person. Sorry, collaborative. Don't.
I was going to try and keep that one quiet. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I brought my own product person. Oh. And this is Lion. I'm autistic, and Lion's gone everywhere with me for about 10 years. And the feedback from the last time we talked was need more Lion. So you can have your more Lion. He always shows us up. It's kind of embarrassing.
More followers than I have on Twitter.
Yeah, I finally caught up with his Twitter followers. Okay, so the most important slide of this whole talk, we're not going to talk about science, we're going to talk about anecdote. The plural of anecdote isn't data. We're just going to tell you one story about how we approach things. We're not talking for all autistic people, and we're certainly not talking for all Wookiees. They do this whole pulling your arms off thing that's kind of frowned upon. Mr. Lawyer Man, have I covered?
Yeah, I think we are basically disclaimed the hell out. So if you rely on this and do anything silly, that's your own damn fault.
If you have a weird lump, see a doctor, basically. If you have a digital equivalent of a weird lump, see a doctor. God, that joke is not landing. Do you need more coffee? More coffee? Less coffee? Do I need to do a little jig? Come on. What I normally do is I pick one person at the front who's smiling and then just stare at them. And today it's this poor gentleman in the white. If he starts frowning halfway through the talk, it's all going to go off the rails.
When he starts trying to hide behind his notepad, that's when you know he freaked him out.
Also, I'm autistic. I can't tell the difference between a grimace and a smile, so this should be fun. Okay, we ready to go?
Crack on, mate.
Coffee down? Okay, so we're going to talk about three things today. We'd like to talk about ERMI, which is our product, the thing we do when we're not doing any things. Then we're going to talk about how we collaborate, and then I'm quickly going to talk through the technical side of building ERMI. You're going to see this slide quite a lot, as it's the structure that we'll come across. So, Mr. Wookie, take it away. ERMI is
It's a tool that uses data to scrutinise transactions that take place through banks and financial institutions in order to detect money laundering.
Are you finished? Great. It's basically, we have a big file, a CSV file of banking data. Numbers, business, maths happens. It poos a spreadsheet, and then we put the spreadsheet on the cloud and go, ta-da!
So an FYI, it poos a spreadsheet is what I said to the head of compliance for an international bank when I described how it worked.
Nom, poo, poo, poo.
He thought it was quite funny.
Or in other words, bad stuff in this file. All the stuff we think is fraud, all the stuff we think is illegal, it's in there, go look. Make sense?
Yeah.
It's really very simple. I don't see what all the fuss is about, frankly. So why do we do this? Well, effectively, in the industry, there are two types of tool. One is probably a lady called Doris, or similar, who sits and goes through all of the transactions in a spreadsheet and hopes she can spot the fraud. The other thing is multi-million-pound tools that are real-time dashboards, lots of complexity. Our aim is to sit in the middle. We aim to be cheaper and better than doing it with people, but we're not trying to compete with the multi-million-dollar tools. Because frankly, business, numbers isn't really our thing. But there are other reasons too. So one of them is, and it's going to sound a bit silly, but we actually want to help protect people and fight crime. So I'm autistic and quite vulnerable. So we've taken advantage of knowing the ways that I'm vulnerable and then started building rules around it. So for example, if one of the carers came up to me and said, I did your shopping yesterday, you owe me £20. I'd go, okay, here's £20. If they did it the next day, I'd probably still give them another 20 quid because I tend to trust people and I don't trust my own memory much because it's full of holes. So we ended up building a set of rules that do things like imports the database from the Care Quality Commission, And then, oh, actually, I can do it better than that. Given a payer and the payer's location as a care home, when the analysis tool, and their turnover, and they've made frequent small payments, when the analysis tool is run, then the payer should be flagged. How's that for live gherkining?
I'll do the same thing that you do to me every single time and say the phrase frequent small payments is ill-defined and you need to tell me what that means.
Okay.
We are going to come on to that later on, by the way.
Oh, I can't
how many
remember.
arguments that
It's got a
caused.
definition somewhere. I've hidden that underneath the skin. So we did things like we built rules based on our own experiences. The second thing is we think it's kind of ridiculous that banks are paying multiple pounds per transaction for this very basic thing. And because it's so expensive, a lot of people who need it don't have it. So all of the people committing fraud and crime go through those tools. So they know where the weaknesses are. So it's kind of that rising tide thing. If we can just lift the worst of it out, we actually protect everybody a little bit better. And the third thing is I used to be addicted to video games and I'm not anymore. So this is kind of like my therapy. When I'm done doing BBC stuff for the day and I've broken all of the BBC things, I come and break this instead. Fair enough?
I'm not sure it's the improvement you're selling it as, but I mean, it's not heroin, so at least we've got you off that.
Woo! God, it's like Lego. It's so Moorish.
Not supposed to eat it.
I'm not eating the Lego, just collecting it and hoarding it and storing it in little bags.
It's like a weird Lego dragon.
Like a weird Lego dragon. That's a phrase. So that's what we do with ERMI, and this isn't really flowing great yet, is it? No. This will get there eventually. So this is ERMI, and that's what we do. We eat bank data, we poop fraud. Fair enough?
No, we poop fraud prevention.
Poop fraud prevention. Oh, that's like your job title, Head of Financial Crime.
Yeah, it should be Head of Financial Crime Prevention, but for years I've been removing the word prevention and just putting Head of Financial Crime, and waiting to see how long it is before somebody asks me whether I'm going full Breaking Bad.
Yeah. It's like, if I don't pay you enough, you break my knuckles. It's great. Knuckle realignment. Sorry, I keep getting that wrong. So here's one of the things. We need to collaborate, and he's a product person, legal expert, and if I'm honest, I'm a jobbing front-end developer who knows a bit of JavaScript, and that's about it. So we needed to learn how we could collaborate and how we could get on without killing each other. Because, you know, have you ever heard the thing, don't start software products or businesses with your friends? Hey, yeah. Neighbours, hi, family, almost.
Close enough, yeah.
So we broke all of those, so we had to make sure that this didn't go horribly wrong and kill us both. Now, when it came to collaboration, we've also got the joy. We've also got the joy that I'm autistic, so we had to build that into what we were doing, and then end up building a way of working that both complements the fact that I'm autistic and complements how it needs to fit into the rest of our lives. So let's crack on with communication first. So we've decided that we had a confusion of collaborators. So Lion wanted it to screen for Antelope, Wookie wanted it to have a fancy UI and maps, and I was sat there basically going, how do I build all of this in a weekend? And as with a lot of things when it comes to confusion, we had to start by kind of naming stuff. So I'm going to introduce a tool that you may not have heard of. It's called Cucumber.
Big fans.
Big fans of Cucumber. Although having to explain the difference between cucumber and gherkin to people. The gherkin, what, like that big building? Sort of. Given a big building, when the wind blows. So we adopted Cucumber from the very outset, because when Wookie would explain rules to me, I would get really confused. So for example, payee and payer. I can still not remember which way round they go.
If it's any consolation, neither can people who work in banks. They really should have named them to sender, receiver, remitter, beneficiary, but no, payer and payee. And that's in the regulations as well. It's the EU's fault. Honestly, we should leave that thing. It's a mess. Sarcasm! Sarcasm! Sarcasm flag! Jeez.
Ooh, I could feel the whole temperature in the room drop. Too soon, dude, too soon.
You thought telling him I was a product guy was bad.
So we went for like payer and beneficiary, right? Keep it simple. Also, I'm dyslexic and can't spell beneficiary. So that was also fun as well. So when we first started talking about the product, we ended up talking about what we were going to build. We were building a kit car together. And at the time, I didn't have verbal speech. So I was literally hiding under a kit car with a spanner. And I was stuck in the room with a disgruntled Google employee who was basically telling me about all the ways their software was awful. So I couldn't escape. And you know what happens when you corner a developer and you tell them a problem? The developer has that really bad thought, which is, Doesn't sound that complicated. Now that's a thought that have led many of us astray over the years.
Which is ironic because product people go, oh, it's not that hard, it's really, really simple. It's just one change to the system and you're going, oh, Jesus, you don't understand.
But when I was sat there underneath, I was like, well, it's just a big ass CSV file, basically. Yeah, databases, blah, blah, blah. Big CSV file, make some totals, flag some things, put it in the cloud. Doesn't sound that complicated. I've used the Dropbox API. So we started by discussing some gherkin. And that very quickly made us kind of start defining our terms. What do we mean by a payer? What do we mean by a transaction? What do we mean by a flag? And we also got to things like a transaction and a payment may not be the same things. If we're doing like a four-party transaction where you have a company sending the money on your behalf, there might be 4 individual people involved in the transaction, but there's only one payment in the middle, for example. So broadly, we kind of understood what we were talking about with each other. And then we got into stuff like given a beneficiary. Now, do we mean a beneficiary is in the legal entity, Mr. Lion, or do we mean the beneficiary's bank account? So we had to start kind of working out what these things meant. And in a lot of places, our clients didn't know either, which led to some interesting conversations.
So in this point, beneficiary, again, for example, you have multiple parties in the transaction. And when we meant beneficiary in the industry, we meant the final person who actually got the money. But people would throw this kind of terminology around. And what we failed to realize is that you have ultimate beneficiary, which is the person who owns the company, but that's the person who sends the money. And you have beneficiary who's receiving the money. Again, somebody should have named this stuff more clearly at the start. But also, if you click on again, I'd failed to realize that the phrase month was not very, very clearly defined. Obviously, like most people, I go, month, I mean January. And James going, no, I need a specific number of days.
How many days are there in a month?
Yeah. Also,
how many months are there in a year? That's another fun one.
And what happens when we're dealing with leap years? And what happens if we're dealing with a calendar that doesn't have months in the same way that we've got it, with some weird sort of Chinese calendar, which we haven't come onto yet, but we will in years' time.
We're ready for it.
So I failed to realise that all of this stuff was massively undefined, and obviously
we also
that
have
problems.
Fun things like time zones. So 650 time zones in TMDB, and we have to validate every single one of them for both input data and the place in which we do analysis. When we first started, we went, we're okay, we're in the UK, we're on GMT. We never change time zone. Bugger is the short answer to that. We do. We change between BST and GMT. So we ended up having to build that in and build that into our gherkin. So as we were talking about this, as we were defining the gherkin, we had to learn a language and set up some standards between ourselves. We also had to kind of scope the problem and solutions. So we went go-karting and had an argument, which was great because we then got to get the aggression out on the track. Some other sod knocked me off at the last corner when I was winning, but I'm sure they weren't actually working for Wookie.
It was perfect. He was then angry at them and not angry at me for the conversation that happened before. So it was almost perfect.
Woo, distraction. So we would get questions where we'd start talking with stories like, we need, the user looks at the map, the user logs in, the user does this. And then I'd be able to go, okay, well that is 3 months work, that's 6 weeks work. We could start talking about these features. And then the more we talked about it, the more we realized that what we were building was a go-kart. We weren't going to even build a sports car. We were going to build the minimum lightweight product needed to get people a level of fraud protection. So from the very start, we could see that we weren't going to work with big databases, because frankly, I don't know big databases, and we weren't going to build a massive user interface. We recently found out that our entire product has less lines of code than one of our competitors' homepages, which is quite nice. So we have a small product that we're keeping lightweight. And when we talk about features, we ask ourselves, well, do go-karts have air conditioning? Is this air conditioning or is this something about the performance and the handling of the go-kart? By going this way, we also got to build on the skills we had. So for example, I know JavaScript really pretty well. I don't admit it in polite company, but I think it's pretty good. Yes? Okay, nobody hissed at me this time. That's nice. Nobody threw a shoe at me either.
Choose your audience.
And this bloke knows Excel. But as we were talking about it and as we were working through this stuff, we had this realization that our clients all know Excel too. So rather than spend hundreds of thousands of pounds and hundreds of hours replicating Excel badly in a web browser, when all our users would do is log in and download the data anyway, we said, okay, well, let's just build a thing that gives them Excel files and go from there. So the third thing that we've been doing to collaborate successfully is we've been co-owning complexity. So it's very easy to kind of have this set up where you have a product person on one side. Hey, they write a specification with something like find all the suspicious activity.
Which is a general thing. We were talking to one firm who may have been a client, and they gave us their specification for an internal transaction monitoring tool, and it simply said to the developer, the tool must find suspicious activity, and that is all it said. The developer had no knowledge of money laundering and financial crime whatsoever, and that was what he had to work with.
So that's how we're not working, because frankly I'd have killed him by now and fed him to the lion. So what we do instead is we have like a 3-stage process. We collaborate, so we work together first on GitHub and we write the gherkin together. Or quite often, Wookie will draft the gherkin, then I'll kind of tweak it and send it back, and we'll play kind of gherkin tennis, which is a phrase that will not make any sense to anybody outside of this room.
No, but at some point we need some tennis rackets.
And if we really hate each other, we can hit each other with them. So yeah, we play gherkin tennis on GitHub, and then we get to a point where we merge it into our repo. This is actually where we started using Cucumber Jam. Is it called Jam now? There you go. So we were using Cucumber Jam for bits of this. So we'd talk, and then I'd be committing to GitHub because letting product people near GitHub is a little bit scary. I'm just going to make a small change. So yeah, we'd use Jam and we'd look at GitHub. And then the last thing we do is we do planning poker. Now, story points are a bit of a vague concept, but they've worked pretty well for us because we'll be able to have a discussion something like this. This feature is 3 points, and I'll go, ooh, 8 because, da 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 da. And it would reveal the things where we'd misunderstood or the things where we had got the wrong kind of understanding.
I mean, this was a revelation to me again, because I never really, so that investment bank, and also technically the CTO, which is a scary thing in so many different ways. But we would have this constant friction between developers and the product owner of how long things would take and how much complexity was involved. And actually, I'm trying to get them to move towards the process that we're using here, because that cucumber piece and explaining exactly what we're doing to each other and what the requirements are means I get a better understanding as a product person of the complexity involved. And then that sort of planning poker piece at the end means I know how much build time there is involved. And 9 times out of 10, I will say 3, I think this is really, really simple. And Jamie will go, no, you've fundamentally misunderstood how bloody awkward what you are as a person, just generally.
Yeah, just generally. Complete pain in the ass.
But how much of a problem? But how much of a problem you've just created there? And it's only through going through that sort of 3-step process that I go, actually, I've just realised this is massively complicated. Address matching is harder than I thought it was because we've got to buy the data in, etc. So that process from the product side is just generally useful for me. I've learned so much.
Yay! And we also do things, I've learned a lot about time zones in the last year and a half. I've learned enough about time zones that I literally dream about time zones.
As an FYI, did anybody see the quote from about the EU changing and allowing people to change time zones? And one of the MPs in the UK said, oh, it's bad enough they're enforcing their rules on us, but now they want to be time lords, which I thought was the greatest.
Can I be a time lord? I want to be a time lord. Oh. So examples of things like this. I think Wookie said, oh, can we add a sheet to the spreadsheet showing people their largest transactions? And then we went, okay, well, to do that, we actually have to translate, because a lot of foreign exchange companies, because they're always sending different currencies, they're never pegging it back to a single currency, they don't know what their largest transaction was. So we ended up pulling that data out of our system and just including it in the spreadsheet. And it's still one of the most useful tools in the spreadsheet, because the person can sit at it and go, I don't recognize that transaction. I should have had that one come through me, and it didn't. So those sorts of things. We started by building in quality from the start. Testing was there in our 2nd or 3rd commit, because quite frankly, I have 0 confidence in anything. Has anybody tried to do mathematics with JavaScript? Literally, you can't add 2 numbers together and get the right answer. We found this out on about my 9th commit. I started regretting using JavaScript from that point on, and it's now been 2 years of solid regret. But it's still the best programming language I know, and for what we're doing, which is eating a spreadsheet 1 line at a time, it's actually very efficient. Also, we can talk about JavaScript multi-threading at some point. It does have it, and it's actually quite straightforward. But anyway, so we have taken the decision from the start that we will carry any technical debt in the solution, not the testing. So generally speaking, we have built the complicated test system up front. We have about 4 times more code in our test system than in our application. But that confidence in the testing means that when we come to refactor something or we have a better way of doing something, we can quickly implement it with a high degree of confidence. So kind of like the second part of this is the joys of working with an autistic person. So for a moment, I'd like to talk about a thing that every grown-up in my life says to me at some point, which is go wash your hands in the toilet. When I was about 8, I started asking if I should flush the toilet first. Because I'm very literal, it's an autism thing. I tend to do exactly what I'm told to do. You are allowed to laugh at that, by the way. That is really fucking funny. It's fine.
It's amazing he's still alive.
It's amazing, but it's fine. You can laugh at me being literal. But it's really great for Gherkin, because I will respond literally, and that can be really useful. Rather than trying to fight it and trying to get Jamie to use more figurative language, we embraced the literalism and kind of went for it.
It has bits in the arse once, which is where my Gherkin was literally wrong.
Yeah.
And the great side of that for Jamie is that he can go, you are literally wrong.
Yeah.
You have an outcome, it's not in the technical specification, it's not in the spec that you've written that's got flowery language, it's there in 6 lines of Gherkin and you were wrong, you asked for the wrong thing.
Yeah,
Which
it happens.
If you can do that to a product person is an achievement.
Well, in a way, yes and no, but at the same time, we also found, so I wasn't particularly angry when we got it wrong, because quite frankly, I think out of 1,000 dev hours, we've wasted about 90. Less than, what's that, 9%? I think there's a lot of product people who'd love to only waste 9% of their developers' time. And whilst we didn't achieve that rule, we did build some building blocks along the way that we can reuse in the future. I was a little annoyed at the time, though, as I'd been kind of working weekends. So we split it up like this, where basically Wookie does all of the businessy stuff and I do all of the codey things. I think we're running out of time, aren't we?
5 minutes.
Damn. Because I've got a whole third of a presentation to go yet. Okay, I'll get through this bit really quickly. So that's how we collaborate, which is basically what this event is around. By using Gherkin, we have a single point of reference and we have a single shared language. So how does ERMI itself actually work? Well, we're using the cloud, man. Well, more specifically, we realised that the value was in the output. How we got to the output didn't really matter. Our clients don't give a shit whether we use Go or JavaScript or MongoDB or whatever other thing that's fancy this week. I should have built it in React, damn it.
All of their developers.
One person laughed, well done, thank you. The value is in the output, and our goal is to deliver value to the user, not necessarily build a giant tech infrastructure. Now, it's really easy to say that, ooh, we're big data. And when you go 30 million data points and $3 billion worth of transactions per evening, that sounds really cool. Then you realize it's about 100 meg. It's not actually that big. So we're not big data, we're detailed data, with the difference being that in big data, no single line matters, but in detailed data, every line matters. I'll wait for people to stop taking photos. That's a good sign. And part of it is we've been keeping it really simple. So I'll give you a complete technical walkthrough of ERMI. There's a spreadsheet and some CPU threads. Each CPU thread does each type of analysis. So they're just streams. Each one drinks the file itself and it poops out another spreadsheet, and then they all get glued together into an Excel spreadsheet. I put that inside a Docker container. It's just a command line application. You do ERMI, analyze, give it a file, it poops out another file. Wrap that in a Docker container. Put the Docker container onto AWS batch and trigger it with Lambda. That's our entire infrastructure. What we do is, if we've got a really big client, we might ask them to split by, let's say, all of the... Ooh, that's a weird noise. Somebody's playing with a balloon. So if we've got a really big client, we might ask them to split by, let's say, name, so we get 26 times parallelism. All of the action analysis happens in parallel as well. So we can just spin up and drop down these jobs off of AWS batch using Lambda. Now, one of the reasons why we can do this is that on the cloud, 1,000 CPUs for 1 hour costs the same as 1 CPU for 1,000 hours. So it's not necessarily about being efficient, it's about keeping things really simple. So rather than building a piece of software that can screen over a 7-day period or has a live database system, we have a single piece of software that's very simple that we can run multiple times. So if you want to have 15 minutes latency between a transaction and the analysis, we'll just run our piece of software every 15 minutes. If you want to have a day's latency, run it once a day. If you want to have a week's latency, run it once a week. It's that sort of thing. So it's very simple, and we have multiple overlapping runs of a simple piece of software rather than having complicated date logic within the software. And finally, and the biggest benefit for me, is that unless we're running, we don't exist. Because we don't have any standing infrastructure and we don't have any databases or APIs to secure, I sleep a lot better at night knowing that there's nothing for people to attack. Although it can sometimes get a little bit confusing when our clients who are banks go, can we have an IP address for your system? And I'm like, I don't know what it is. If you can find it out for me, that would be great. Because I think we randomize region, availability zone, and the time that it runs. So when I'm debugging it, I sometimes find it hard to find it, which I think is a good sign, right?
We have had security consultants looking at you can't pen test it, there's nothing to pen test.
Yeah.
We can't even take money off of you to do this because there's nothing for us to do. The consultants go mad. You can see it melting in front of you.
But I had one of those security questionnaires. What's your joiners and leaving process? Don't have any. What's your two-factor authentication? We don't have a login system.
Well, I'm shit out of ideas, yeah.
Yeah, so that was quite fun. I was at an event in the US recently talking to someone from MIT who is a security researcher there. And he pointed out that our biggest vulnerability was me, yay, and the fact that I'm easy to manipulate, and the insider, someone within the company attacking us. That's our biggest vulnerabilities, we think. Although I'm not going to say that too loudly because I don't want to go, it's the Titanic, it's unsinkable. Let's not say it's secure and it's unhackable. It's relatively secure, but there's nothing more secure than turned off. And in a nutshell, that's everything we're going to talk about. ERMI, collaboration, and how we build it. Thank you for listening, and I'm only about 5 minutes late, which isn't too bad. Yay.